energy crisis, you must call it this way.
What has prompted this turn of events?
We have food poverty and we have the climate crisis.
So why is Volkswagen closing or thinking of closing down its factories, and that too in Germany?
The rise of electric vehicles might have encountered an unforeseen obstacle, with Europe at the core of it. A startling development has upended the EV industry, leaving car manufacturers struggling to keep up. What could disrupt one of the world's fastest expanding markets? Stay tuned to understand how this shift might transform the future of mobility forever. Is it truly happening? Just a few years back, Europe appeared set to dominate the electric vehicle revolution. Governments introduced bold policies, pledging billions in funding to construct state-of-the-art plants and laid the global battery market. European firms, supported by major industry players and venture funding, were celebrated as pioneers of clean energy, progress, and economic resilience. EVs weren't just vehicles. They symbolized Europe's capacity to reinvent itself and spearhead a cleaner, more sustainable tomorrow. But that vision is unraveling rapidly. Companies that once vowed to secure Europe's energy independence and climate goals are now folding. Surging energy expenses, halts in manufacturing, and fierce rivalry with global leaders have left Europe's EV industry in turmoil. Northvolt, once seen as Europe's key to global EV dominance, is one of the victims, and its downfall reflects a far-reaching systemic challenge. The stakes have never been higher. Europe's capability to tackle crucial issues like climate change and energy security depends on the EV sector's success. Losing ground in this race doesn't just weaken Europe's economy, it also puts global efforts to cut emissions and transition to renewable energy at risk, endangering the planet. When Europe declared its daring plans to transform the electric vehicle industry, it was a significant step toward addressing some of the world's greatest challenges. The initiative aimed to make Europe more than a participant. It sought to establish the region as a leader in the clean energy shift. From slashing greenhouse gas emissions to securing energy independence, the plan wasn't solely economic. It was intertwined with environmental targets and a vision for a sustainable, competitive Europe. Central to Europe's EV ambitions was the goal of cutting emissions in transportation. For decades, this sector has been among the largest contributors to greenhouse gases, accounting for almost a quarter of emissions in the EU. With 2050 climate goals approaching, reducing these emissions became a pressing need. Electrification of vehicles was seen as an ideal answer. Greener cars powered by renewable energy could significantly lower carbon emissions while delivering innovative transportation solutions to consumers. Aside from environmental priorities, the drive for energy independence was crucial. Europe's heavy reliance on imported fossil fuels has long been an economic and geopolitical risk. The region's dependency on foreign oil and gas from unstable suppliers left it vulnerable to market swings and political conflicts. By locally producing EVs and batteries, Europe aimed to safeguard its energy future while reducing external risks. This strategy was intended to cut fossil fuel dependence and establish a more resilient, self-reliant energy system. To bring this vision to life, the European Union set out to become a major player in the EV industry. Policymakers imagined a flourishing ecosystem where batteries and electric cars made in Europe would become global benchmarks. Substantial funds were committed to strengthen the EV supply chain, covering everything from raw material mining to factory setups and assembly operations. Leading the effort were companies like Northvolt, Volkswagen, and other automotive and tech leaders. Northvolt especially came to embody Europe's EV dreams. Founded in Sweden with robust backing from private investors and government initiatives, the company promised to manufacture EV batteries domestically to rival those produced by Asian giants like CATL and LG Chem. Volkswagen, a major European automotive brand, also took the lead by investing billions into EV development and forging partnerships with battery suppliers. Producing batteries within Europe was vital to the strategy. At the time, the continent relied heavily on imports for key components and raw materials in battery production. This reliance not only drove up expenses, but also hindered Europe's ability to compete with Asian manufacturers. By developing a comprehensive EV supply chain, Europe hoped to position itself as a global leader while retaining jobs and profits within the region. Building a robust EV industry wasn't just about meeting climate objectives, it was also seen as an economic opportunity. Europe envisioned EVs as a means to revitalize its industrial sector and offset job losses in traditional car manufacturing as the shift away from combustion engines gained momentum. A thriving EV sector was projected to create hundreds of thousands of jobs, spanning activities like mining raw materials, battery production, vehicle assembly, and software development. Additionally, achieving dominance in the global EV market would greatly benefit Europe's GDP. By capturing a significant portion of this booming industry, Europe could fortify its economic standing amid rising global competition. Countries like China already held a strong lead in battery production, and the US was rapidly expanding its EV investments. Europe knew it couldn't afford to lag behind. That was the driving belief. To rival Asia's dominance, Europe's plan included building gigafactories to mass-produce batteries on a competitive scale. Policymakers introduced incentives like subsidies and tax breaks to encourage investment in these megaplants. Agreements were also struck to ensure a steady supply of critical materials like lithium, cobalt, and nickel, which are essential for battery production. Recycling old batteries was also planned to decrease reliance on freshly mined resources. Europe's ambition to lead the EV sector was calculated. Global EV leadership would allow the region to set industry benchmarks and steer its direction. If Europe established itself as a hub of EV innovation, other regions would have to follow its technological and regulatory lead. The risks were significant, but so were the potential rewards. The cracks begin to show. Despite these ambitious efforts, flaws in Europe's EV plans started to surface. Escalating energy prices, international competition, and supply chain issues have turned this once hopeful vision into a mounting crisis. Companies like Northvolt are struggling to fulfill their promises, and Europe's dream of becoming an EV powerhouse now faces steep challenges. In hindsight, the plan was bold, but the obstacles were underestimated. Europe's EV sector now finds itself in a vulnerable position, and the ripple effects are being felt across industries, economies, and environmental initiatives. The situation continues to deteriorate with each passing day. The growing crisis. Europe's challenges in the EV industry have only deepened over time. Problems such as skyrocketing energy costs, disrupted supply chains, tough global competition, and economic uncertainties have hindered progress and revealed cracks in Europe's strategy. The energy crisis has become one of the greatest hurdles for Europe's EV ambitions. Geopolitical conflicts, dependence on imported gas, and inadequate investment in renewables have driven energy prices to unprecedented levels. Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine exposed this vulnerability as European nations scrambled to find alternative gas sources and lessen reliance on Russian energy. However, this swift transition caused energy costs to spike, straining industries with high energy demands. Battery production, a critical element of the EV sector, is one of the most energy-intensive processes. Producing lithium-ion batteries requires a significant amount of electricity, making the process highly sensitive to energy price fluctuations. For European manufacturers, the ability to compete with regions like China, where energy expenses are considerably lower, has become increasingly challenging. This growing disparity has led many firms to reduce production, reconsider expansion plans, or, in some cases, face financial collapse. Northvolt, once celebrated as the beacon of Europe's EV dreams, is a clear example. Escalating energy prices rendered its business model unviable, ultimately leading to its downfall. Another pressing issue lies in Europe's dependence on imported raw materials and components necessary for battery production. Key resources such as lithium, cobalt, nickel, and graphite, essential for manufacturing EV batteries, are predominantly sourced from regions outside Europe. For example, over 60% of the global lithium supply originates in Australia. Most cobalt from the Democratic Republic of Congo is refined in China, and Indonesia dominates the nickel market. Disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, coupled with geopolitical tensions, have severely impacted these supply chains. Lockdowns, port backlogs, and logistical challenges delayed the movement of raw materials, driving up costs and slowing production. Adding to the problem, trade disputes and export restrictions from key suppliers have further limited access to these critical resources. Europe's lack of a secure and resilient supply chain for these materials has emerged as a significant vulnerability in its quest for EV market dominance. While efforts to develop recycling technologies and establish local mining operations are underway, progress remains slow and insufficient to meet the growing demand. During Europe's bid to establish itself as a leader in the EV industry, other regions were busy consolidating their stronghold in the market. Asia, led by China and South Korea, has solidified its position as the hub of global battery production. Industry giants such as Contemporary Amperex Technology Co. Limited, or CATL, and LG Chem have secured leading positions by leveraging economies of scale, lower production costs, and government-backed incentives. China, in particular, has become a dominant force by heavily investing in EV infrastructure and vertically integrating its supply chains. Chinese companies now control more than 70% of global battery production, utilizing cost-effective methods to deliver high-quality products. Their integrated approach, from raw material extraction to final battery assembly, has given them a competitive edge that Europe struggles to match. Lower production costs in Asia are further supported by more affordable labor, cheaper energy, and less stringent environmental regulations. While Europe adheres to stricter standards, it has fallen behind in producing competitively priced batteries at the scale required to challenge its global rivals. This competitive disadvantage has made it increasingly difficult for European firms to secure a foothold in the global EV market. Economic challenges have added another layer of complexity to Europe's EV ambitions. Soaring inflation across the region has driven up the cost of raw materials and operational expenses. Rising interest rates have exacerbated these issues, making it more difficult for businesses to secure financing for new projects. The financial strain is not limited to producers. Consumers too are feeling the impact. Despite growing interest in EVs, they still come with a higher initial cost compared to traditional vehicles. With inflation eroding disposable incomes and consumer purchasing power, demand for EVs has weakened in some parts of Europe, creating additional uncertainty for manufacturers navigating an already volatile market. Moreover, the ability to attract private and public investment has been severely hindered by the broader economic instability. Investors are increasingly hesitant to commit to an industry grappling with high costs and shrinking profit margins. While government subsidies and incentives have provided some relief, they have proven insufficient to close the funding gaps faced by the industry. These factors have combined to create a perfect storm for Europe's EV ambitions. Rising energy costs have undermined production, supply chain disruptions have halted critical operations, and global competition has widened the gap between Europe and more established players like China. Meanwhile, economic instability has amplified these challenges, leaving many companies struggling to survive. The fall of a symbolic leader. Northvolt was once a promising symbol of Europe's aspirations to lead the global electric vehicle revolution. Its rise and subsequent collapse highlight the broader struggles and systemic issues facing the European EV sector, from financial difficulties to deeper structural challenges. Founded in 2016, Northvolt set out with an ambitious goal to develop sustainable, locally produced battery solutions for EVs in Europe. By reducing reliance on imports, particularly from Asia, the company aimed to align itself with Europe's climate targets while strengthening the region's industrial base. Backed by major players like Volkswagen and Goldman Sachs, Northvolt was heralded as a flagship project for Europe's green energy ambitions. The timing seemed ideal. With governments enacting ambitious climate policies, EV demand surging, and the European Union eager to establish itself in the global battery market, Northvolt positioned itself as a pioneer. The company planned to build multiple gigafactories to meet the growing demand, presenting itself as a challenger to industry leaders like CATL and Chem. Northvolt became the embodiment of Europe's vision for a green industrial revolution, with plans to localize battery production, create jobs, and establish the region as a global leader in clean technology. However, despite its promising start, the company faced mounting challenges that ultimately derailed its plans. The soaring energy crisis in Europe became a critical obstacle. Geopolitical tensions and the reduction of natural gas imports from Russia drove electricity prices to unprecedented levels, severely impacting energy-intensive industries like battery manufacturing. At the same time, supply chain disruptions and surging raw material costs further compounded Northvolt's struggles. Essential materials such as lithium, cobalt, and nickel became more expensive and harder to obtain due to heightened global demand and logistical delays during the pandemic. These challenges forced Northvolt to revise its production schedules, miss key milestones, and reassess its financial outlook. Competition from established Asian manufacturers added to the pressure. Companies like CATL and LG Chem, operating in regions with lower production costs, continued to dominate the market. Although European governments provided subsidies to support local production, these measures fell short of bridging the competitive gap. Northvolt's ambitious expansion plans further strained its resources. Efforts to scale operations proved more difficult than anticipated, leading to missed targets and mounting debts. By 2023, the company found itself unable to sustain operations under such conditions, culminating in bankruptcy. The collapse of Northvolt dealt a severe financial blow to its stakeholders. Major investors like Volkswagen, which held a 21% stake in the company, and Goldman Sachs faced significant losses. Volkswagen wrote down the value of its investment, while Goldman Sachs reported nearly $900 million in losses. These financial repercussions underscored the inherent risks of an industry fraught with cost volatility and fierce competition. Beyond the financial impact, Northvolt's downfall delivered a symbolic setback to Europe's EV ambitions. The company had been a cornerstone of the region's plans to lead the global clean energy transition. Its failure exposed deeper flaws in Europe's energy and industrial strategies, from high production costs and supply chain vulnerabilities to a lack of competitive edge against established players. The collapse of Northvolt serves as a stark reminder of the challenges Europe faces in achieving its EV goals. Without addressing these systemic issues, the region risks falling further behind in the global race to dominate the electric vehicle industry. Europe's electric vehicle sector has faced significant setbacks, not solely due to poor management or the downfall of individual companies, but because of systemic issues that reveal deeper flaws in the region's strategy. Tackling these challenges is essential for the industry's survival and Europe's overarching sustainability objectives. One of the most critical hurdles to Europe's EV aspirations is the ongoing energy crisis, which heavily impacts manufacturing operations and overall competitiveness. Europe's reliance on imported energy, especially natural gas, has become glaringly apparent. Geopolitical factors, such as reduced gas supplies from Russia, have driven energy costs to unprecedented highs. Producing EV batteries, an electricity-intensive process, has thus become prohibitively costly in many European countries. Battery gigafactories require steady and affordable power to function optimally. However, volatile energy prices have rendered these facilities far less competitive compared to their Asian counterparts, where energy costs remain lower and more predictable. Consequently, European manufacturers struggle to remain profitable, let alone compete on a global scale. This crisis also underscores Europe's insufficient emphasis on scaling up renewable energy. Although adoption has grown, infrastructure limitations and inconsistent progress have left the EV industry heavily reliant on fossil fuels, undermining sustainability goals. Without resolving these energy-related issues, Europe's vision for a self-reliant EV ecosystem will remain unattainable. Europe's EV supply chain is deeply entangled in global geopolitical tensions that threaten its long-term sustainability. The region's dependence on imported raw materials like lithium, cobalt, and nickel creates strategic weaknesses. These essential materials are primarily sourced and processed outside Europe, especially in regions like China, Chile, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. China dominates the global battery manufacturing and supply chain, controlling up to 80% of rare earth material refinement. This dependency exposes Europe to disruptions triggered by geopolitical events, trade conflicts, or protectionist policies from other nations. The situation is further complicated by US-China tensions, which hinder Europe's ability to competitively procure materials. Moreover, the US Inflation Reduction Act, with its robust subsidies and tax incentives for domestic EV production, has created additional challenges. European companies now face intensified competition from not only Asian manufacturers but also US-based firms, which are heavily investing in their EV ecosystems. Unless Europe advances its recycling efforts for rare earth materials or develops alternative technologies, the EV industry will remain vulnerable to external pressures. While the European Union has introduced ambitious policies to support the EV sector, they have fallen short in addressing fundamental structural issues. Subsidies and funding have supported initial development, but deeper challenges remain unaddressed. A key issue is the sluggish expansion of EV infrastructure. Despite efforts to increase the number of charging stations, progress has lagged behind countries like China, which has aggressively scaled up its charging networks. Limited access to charging points deters potential EV buyers, slowing adoption rates. Additionally, policies aimed at protecting the industry, such as tariffs or trade barriers, have proven inadequate. Although taxes are imposed on imported EVs, they are insufficient to counter the pricing advantage of low-cost competitors. Fragmented regulations across EU member states further exacerbate inefficiencies. The planned 2035 ban on the sale of combustion engine vehicles presents another hurdle. While this policy reflects strong climate ambitions, many argue it lacks the necessary framework to ensure EV industry readiness. Challenges such as limited battery production, insufficient raw material processing, and high energy costs leave Europe ill-equipped to meet these targets. The collapse of key players like Northvolt has shaken investor confidence in Europe's EV industry. Once optimistic investors are now increasingly cautious. Billions of euros in investments have been lost, impacting major stakeholders such as Volkswagen and Goldman Sachs. Private sector hesitation is understandable, given the combination of volatile energy costs, fragile supply chains, and intense competition from Asia and the US. Public funding alone is insufficient to sustain the industry, while the lack of decisive signals from policymakers further discourages private investment. This unfavorable climate not only hampers the development of new projects but risks further losses if other ventures fail. Europe's EV industry struggles have global ramifications. The failure to establish a competitive EV ecosystem emphasizes the interconnected nature of global industries and the delicate balance required to achieve ambitious climate objectives. Europe's setbacks have further solidified Asia's dominance in battery manufacturing and EV production. Countries like China, South Korea, and Japan, already global leaders, are widening the gap thanks to their established supply chains, cost advantages, and strong domestic markets. This growing reliance on Asian-made components undermines Europe's efforts to achieve supply chain independence. European automakers are increasingly dependent on imports, exposing them to price fluctuations and export restrictions from Asian manufacturers. The implications for climate change are equally concerning. Europe's struggles jeopardize its climate commitments, delaying transportation decarbonization, a sector responsible for nearly a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions. Slower EV adoption in Europe risks derailing global progress toward emission reduction targets. Europe's experience offers valuable lessons for other regions seeking to develop their EV industries. First, aligning energy policy with industrial goals is crucial. Europe's reliance on imported energy, coupled with underdeveloped renewable infrastructure, exposed significant vulnerabilities. Emerging markets must prioritize renewable energy and domestic production to avoid similar pitfalls. Second, diversifying supply chains is essential. Europe's dependence on foreign sources for raw materials was worsened by geopolitical tensions. Developing domestic processing capabilities and recycling technologies is critical for mitigating supply chain risks. Finally, sustainable growth requires robust partnerships between governments and private sectors. Europe's over-reliance on public subsidies without fostering market competitiveness left the industry unprepared for external shocks. While Europe's EV industry faces daunting challenges, this crisis presents an opportunity for transformation. By addressing its energy crisis, reducing supply chain dependencies, and investing in cutting-edge technologies, Europe can reclaim its position as a global leader. Key steps include scaling renewable energy, fostering innovation in next-generation batteries, and rebuilding investor confidence through cohesive policies. Collaboration across governments, industries, and global partners will be pivotal in ensuring the EV industry's resurgence. What's your take on Europe's EV challenges? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more insightful content. See you in the next video.